All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Inside Bitcoin Spaces with Jason and Andrew.
What's up,
Today
Jason?
is Friday, March 20th, 2026. Bitcoin block height 941,448. Bitcoin USD price sitting around 69,929 US dollars. Welcome in, Andrew. How you doing today?
Good, sir. How are you?
Doing good. Good to
Hanging in.
see you.
Yeah, you as well. So yeah, the market's been kind of throwing us a wrench these days, huh?
So we're dragging. You know, we bumped up to 75K. It was last week, maybe mid this week. Now we're back down 69,000, 70,000. Who knows where we're
Yeah.
going to go?
It's funny. A lot of the sentiment I'm hearing when I go to like the Bitcoin meetups and stuff, and kind of listen to the Bitcoin sort of podcast sphere. And I don't listen to everything, but I kind of have a good sampling. It's like this the whole thing with Jane Street. Like, oh, there was this action taken against Jane Street, and suddenly the 10 p.m. Bitcoin dump isn't there. And wait a second, do you think maybe Bitcoin price is like affected by all these derivatives, like the ETFs and these other things? And it's like maybe it's gotten woven into the traditional finance market in the same way other things have that allow for paper Bitcoin. You sometimes will hear like the summer of paper Bitcoin, which I think was last summer, right? Which is kind of when a lot of the ETF took hold. And it's so funny. We haven't really spoken about it much, but I kind of have studied sound money for years. But then that kind of leads into understanding precious metal markets, and it's the same things that the gold and silver market people have been saying for decades. It's like, it's manipulated. We can't ever get a break on the price. As soon as it runs, it gets slammed back down. So they start attributing all these external malevolent forces to the market, right? And the story kind of goes that way. And if you look at the silver chart, I don't know if you saw it, it was like up to 120, and then it got slammed down like 70. I don't think it's down in the 70s, 80s. Anyway, it's like had it just kind of creeped up to this same point it's at now without that spike, everybody would be like, "Oh, it's great. It's like
Yeah.
finally gaining traction." But the sentiment is always the opposite. It's like, "Oh man, it's like if we could only get back to that high." And I think what's interesting to me is that same sort of those rationalities and sort of like kind of emotional highs and lows, and like, oh, if we could just get back and show the world that our asset is the one that really is going to shine, whatever one you rally behind. It's like the same sort of mentality is kind of creeping into the Bitcoin space too. So like now we're down, I don't know, in these like lower levels. It's like, well, you don't have to go back that far, and that's where we were anyway, right?
Yeah.
It's like a year ago, it's like we hadn't seen 120 peak, so everybody's like, it's kind of, what do they say, crab crawling. It's
Yeah.
going sideways. It's kind of like in this, like stuck in this range, and everybody uses all these like anthropomorphic terms. It's like
The
it
Bart
wants to get
Simpson.
out, it wants to break out, it's beaten down. So I'm like, yeah, it's crazy, but I think it's also a sign of maturity. Like as an asset class, it's now the thing that everybody wanted, which was like legitimacy, right? It's like Bitcoin is like, man, if only the financial world like took us seriously, if only big companies saw its value and said, wait a second, we want some of that. If only countries, even small countries, like saw how important it was and like started building sovereign wealth funds, or maybe like the country of Bhutan, like started mining it, or a country of like El Salvador, it's like make it a a currency. uh then we would start getting credibility. It would get to where it can't be like squashed. It's like it'll have more momentum, etc. Well, now we've got a lot of those things. We're kind of on the road. So it's kind of funny. It's like you can't like wish for something and then not get, and when you get it, be too upset about it, because now the counterbalance is always like, oh well, it's more complicated and the pricing is now influenced by these other factors. Well, those other factors are the factors you invited to the party, right? And wanted, like, you wanted that legitimacy, you wanted like regulation, you wanted clarity, you wanted like, the the way governments and institutions and stuff at the edges all viewed this to be more understood and not the Wild West. Well, we're getting there. We're getting to where maybe this touches on the sovereign, or not the sovereign, but the reserve sort of topic. What was the reserve topic coming up today?
Yeah, so it does touch on a little bit with the North Carolina introducing the Bitcoin reserve bill.
Yeah. So we've
So
seen this in a few states now, right?
yeah, North
Like,
Carolina is another state. So this is a bill that's going to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve for North Carolina. It passed its first reading on March 19th. Now, states are going to save in Bitcoin. What's that going to do for the people? I guess the people in charge, the governments, they'll have more funds to do
mhm.
roads and public parks and things like that they're going to do, trash trucks, whatever they're responsible to do. Their own personal salaries can increase, the people that work for the government. But I really
Mhm.
think we got to get out of the mindset of the dollar, valuing Bitcoin in the dollar, everything having a dollar price. I know it's extremely hard because the dollar's been around forever, but if we
Yeah.
keep valuing it in the dollar, then it doesn't make that much sense to me because the dollars are free, they're unlimited. So everything's going to keep going up in the dollar. Why don't we just value it in Bitcoin, which has a 21 million cap limit created by energy? Everyone could see how many there are. So it's probably going to take a long time, though, to stop using the dollar or stop valuing things in the dollar.
Yeah, I think about this a lot and have studied it, and it kind of, in my mind, it goes back to how any new way of thinking about something is just hard.
Super hard.
And you know, you can look at, like, oh, we should think about light as a particle versus light as a wave. Okay, well, that's takes some serious kind of getting your head around. But you go back to like Galileo and Copernicus, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, imagine in a world where, like, well, the Earth's the middle of everything and all this other stuff kind of spins around us. And somebody standing up one day and say, wait a second, actually, I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure that we're one of those spinning things, and we're spinning around that other thing called the sun. And that alone is like heresy, and it was viewed as such, and it took a long time before people came around to the idea, well, wait, actually, when you think about it that way, a lot more stuff fits, you
Mhm.
know uh but it was hard, and it takes generations. And I don't know, I probably showed this book, but this is like one of my things, that my go-tos. It's a book by Thomas Kuhn, and it was written, I think, in 61.
I have it.
And
I have it.
it's the structure of scientific revolutions, and it's like, yeah, it really
I
lays
haven't read it
out
though.
a lot of historical evidence for just how hard things thinking about things on. I mean, going from like steam driven economy and coal and steam to electric and gas in itself was a big, I mean, the whole telecom, the fact that the telecom revolution like compressed distance effectively. I mean, you could work with other people in other places, quite effectively. And that was a big shift. And and these things typically, the TLDR of it is, uh these new types of thinking take generation turnover. Like, people have to kind of come up in an age where at least the new way of thinking is part of the discussion. So they're not so grounded in the old way of thinking that they can't give it up. And then after one or two generation, and if you think of generation as 20 years, that's like 40 years before, and enough people that are stuck on the old system like die effectively. So, and one of the problems is that the people that are kind of in charge of making the rules, the laws, and stuff that everybody else, they don't tend to be the 20-year-olds. They tend to be the 60, 70, 80-year-olds, right?
Yeah, and they don't like to retire. They go all the way until they're dementia patients.
That's right. So, so thinking in terms of Bitcoin is tough, and I think, I'm like you. I wanted to go from fiat to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, man, we just need to like fiat to Bitcoin. How's that going to happen? Well, fiat's got to crash. It's got to crash hard. Take everything out. Like go to like rubble, like smoldering, like apocalypse, and then like the phoenix will rise of Bitcoin, and that'll like ever be glorious. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. So it's like the new question became, it's like, well, if this is inevitable, or at least in our opinion, this is like the strongest currency or asset base, how do we get from here to there? How do we get from a world where everybody thinks in fiat dollars and operates and like makes decisions based on fiat dollars and what the costs of things are and what they think they might be able to earn by this sort of that sort of decision, et cetera, to thinking about things in terms of denominated by Bitcoin? Like, it's too much of a jump mentally. And I think this is where the more I study it, the more I'm kind of not a big fan, but I think the stable coin gets us there, not in the swapping out the denominator so quickly, but at least let's think about trust in our relationship with other entities that we have to deal with. And the introduction of a broad use of stablecoin will get us kind of part of the way, right? Which is like, wait a second, you mean I don't have to deal with a bank? I don't have to deal with a credit card. I don't have to deal with any other intermediate institution to deal with stablecoin. I'll just like pull up my wallet on my phone and pay with it, just like I do with Apple Pay or with, with a credit card, or, swipe this or swipe that. So it fits that modality a lot more concisely, and that's kind of where people's comfort is. But once you kind of are used to that, and you don't have to trust, a bank to be in the middle to do stuff, and maybe you see things like, maybe you start getting paid in stablecoin, right? And like you see it hit your account like instantly, or you remember the day when you ever take a check to a bank branch to deposit it, and it's not your bank branch. And what do they say? It's like, oh, you can deposit it, but it's going to take 5 days, business days to clear. It's like, well, what's that? Well, that's because they don't want to like lose to the other bank. Like, they want to be able to reverse it. So the traditional system that has all these kind of time delays that are designed to like, make sure that they don't get screwed, but yet you get screwed because, wait a second, I got to like pay my rent in 2 days. Like, so anyway, it's interesting, but I think the stablecoins could kind of bridge us there. But even with that, it's going to take some time, because as soon as your stablecoin balance and your Bitcoin balance are right there next to each other, and you're like, well, my stablecoin balance always stays the same, but my Bitcoin balance keeps going up in terms of cost, the price. Well, what if I had a button that said, oh, let's just price it in Bitcoin. Let's flip it around. Oh my God, my US dollar balance is going down. What's that? Why? And I mean, just get people thinking along that line, right?
It could help, like all the points you're saying, but it could also be another multi-decade, multi-century trap where there's a small group of people that create the money for free and everyone else has to work for it. You can see that push kind of going on right now, where there's Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency, but instead it's a digital asset, right? The point that Bitcoin's an asset, it's not a currency. So the stable coins, stable, isn't that ironic? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Stable coins is just a centrally controlled cryptocurrency that someone creates for free. It's not backed by energy like Bitcoin. It's not permissionless, decentralized. All these things are permissioned. So it could help us see the value difference between a stable coin and Bitcoin, but it could also just be a trap that now we're trading the dollar, a centralized system, for an even worse centralized system. I think the education is really a big deal. And, maybe the war, we could talk about the war with Iran. Maybe that is a big thing where people see that when we have unlimited money and people can create money for free whenever they want for any political reason, that enables war. Where Bitcoin really puts a cost on war, where there's only 21 million, it's limited, it requires energy to create. So people are less likely to come up with reasons to go to war because now they can't create money for free and get rich by going to war.
Yeah. Imagine a world where the US says, okay, we think Iran's being a bad actor and that we want to go spend X amount of money to go set them, teach them a lesson or set them straight. And so we're gonna impose a one-time, tax across the flat tax across the whole population. Let's call it 10%. And that everybody gets to vote on that to see, okay, 10% of your holdings
your
is
Bitcoin.
Going to get. Whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? Just imagine the scenario, like when 10% is going to be taken from you and for this purpose. It's like, and who's in agreement with that?
Yeah.
And imagine trying to sell it politically.
Yep.
It's like, everybody be like, no, let's, the answer is no.
Yep.
It's like, we're not going to do that. So it would have to be more like, hey, Martians are invading. We need to take care of half of everybody's, savings to basically not be exterminated by these these outer space aliens. And there's no other way. Okay, well, we'll do it, but
which is a possibility. We might see some sort of fake alien invasion. They've already admitted, the governments have said that, aliens exist, which was a huge blowover. No one really even cared. That just goes to show the trust in government is super low because they come out and say, yeah, we have aliens. We have fact that they exist, whatever they said. And people are like, who cares?
Yeah. Did you see the report about there was some rocket launch that was designed to go and intercept a meteorite and see if it could be nudged out of its trajectory.
Oh no, but I would imagine it could be.
Now I saw this recently. I don't remember the particulars, but it's from what I was reading, it's they were able to show that they could nudge a meteorite or an asteroid, I guess, enough such that if they knew it was going to hit the Earth, they could nudge it enough so that it would skip off the atmosphere or miss us entirely. I don't know, which is kind of a great story that maybe in a lot of people's minds removes the oh, well, we don't have to worry about that cataclysm now. We can take that one off the list. So you got worldwide, epidemic or, getting hit by an asteroid or the sun blowing up or, whatever. The polar shift, there's all sorts of calamitous, scenarios that they talk about. But in terms of war, and I think one of the interesting side effects potentially of this war is that the kind of unmasking of the influence of the petrodollar system in terms of energy consumption and pricing is getting kind of front and center. I was looking at an article this morning. It was showing that there's really 4 different prices of oil now, that depending on the market it's serving and the mechanism and the transport costs and risks, like, and how much is dependent, like, in each jurisdiction. So they're saying like the price for China has gone quite a ways up. Russia is different because they can produce a bunch. China relies on Middle East. U.S., while we tend to buy a lot of imported oil and have in the past, we still actually have quite a bit of our own. Again, how much of this stuff is like fake or not fake, it's hard to know. But as a price discovery mechanism, the whole situation seems to be interesting. And I wonder if that price discovery mechanism will start like showing up in other places, right? It's like, oh, well, now that X costs more to transport, now the cost of X product is going to be at, more or less or whatever. So we'll see where this goes. But it's an interesting kind of macroeconomic study, and the whole like, oh, well, we'll be done by next week. It's like, how many times have we heard we'll be done by next week? It's like, don't look at Iraq or Kuwait. And like now that there's more, I guess, oil field properties on fire and destroyed, it's like reminding me of like, oh, like all the oil well fires that they had to put out back in the Kuwait thing. It's like, man, are we just going to repeat this again?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin just gives the power back to the individual. If you look at this war with Iran, Pentagon comes out and estimates the cost that the U.S. spent $11 billion in the first 6 days of the conflict or the war, whatever you want to call it. How many dollars are going to come from just this central authority with their own decision making? They get to say, this is good enough. Let's create dollars, inflate dollars. Therefore, all the goods and services go up in price. Yeah, we like it with Bitcoin, but it's a silly game that we're playing where a central entity gets to create it for free and everyone else, we have to go trade our time and energy for that same dollar currency.
That's right. There was a really good write-up of this this last week or so. I'll try to find it here. We're talking. I sent it to a friend. I thought it was so good. So let me try to find it.
Yeah, so I think we just need more. It sucks to say, but it's like more pain. People have to actually have skin in the game. They have to actually feel the pain of inflation. I know a lot of people are, but you got to feel it more. And then not only that, you have to connect the dots and figure out what's the cause of it, right? It's one thing to experience pain. Okay, that's step one. You're looking for a solution, but then you can be tricked into a solution. Like, well, here's the solution, and guess what it is? Stable coins. Now, the dollar sucks. Now, for every $100, it's worth one stable coin. So these stable coins are worth 100 times more than the US dollar. It's the new US dollar, Trump dollar. Who knows what they're going to call it? But if it's not decentralized, permissionless, no one controls it, provably backed by energy, it requires energy to create. Henry Ford came out and said something back in the day about energy money would stop wars. And here we are.
Yeah, he did.
And here we are. We have it right now. Exactly. Bitcoin is energy money.
Yeah. I found the thing. Let me share it quick.
All right.
So I thought this was pretty interesting take. So it comes from 1031. They're like a Bitcoin venture capital fund.
Okay.
Also associated with Marty Bent and the TFTC, the Truth for the Commoner site. So if you want, and I'm not going to go to Odell. Yeah, he's involved in this as well. But basically, they make the case of this, right? That, you got corporations, they have their own equity, and then they are kind of the engine of them is corporate debt, and that as countries go, they have sovereign debt, and then to pay for that, see, corporations have to like go make money, sell products and stuff. That's where their equity comes from. They actually have to do something. Whereas countries, they just create more fiat, right? And but the point of this is that while not a direct dampener on what governments can do in terms of expanding their sovereign debt, Bitcoin does kind of act as a kind of suppressing force, and through the stable coin, because for one, stable coins are one-to-one reserve. So unlike commercial banking, they're not fractionalized. So you don't have the multiplication effect. And through other reasons that they do kind of, and it gets into here in the details, but it gets into kind of a dampening sort of effect. So even though Bitcoin is not like the end all, like a force that governs everything yet, it is starting to apply a kind of a dampening effect on what governments can do. And
I
I
under,
thought that was kind of interesting.
I understand the premise, but I don't agree with it. And the fatal flaw to this idea is that okay, Bitcoin's 21 million, it's backed by the consensus, it's backed by energy, right? You can't just make a Bitcoin, you have to mine a Bitcoin. You have to create the energy to get the Bitcoin, right? The energy is
Mm-hmm.
what is the gatekeeper of the Bitcoin. You got to spend, you got to mine. You got to have your computer throwing darts and guessing these numbers, which requires machines and energy. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what keeps the Bitcoin pegged to the 21 million, the consensus plus the mining.
Yep.
So what keeps the peg between the stablecoin and the Bitcoin? My word, your database. There's no
Mm-hmm.
energy mechanism that ties it and bounds it to energy to the real world. That's one of the amazing inventions of Bitcoin. So there will be no peg. How can you make sure it's one to one?
Yeah, there's all of these things, unless it's a bearer instrument. We talk about this over and over, and I think it's worth reinforcing for the folks that just haven't heard it enough. Unless you hold it and can control it, there's some amount of trust me, bro, involved. That's what we call a counterparty and a counterparty risk. So if you're buying an ETF share, a Bitcoin ETF, it's like you're not buying Bitcoin, you're buying a percentage of ownership of a financial asset that claims it has equal amount of Bitcoin to support all the shares that's been created behind it, that they control, is custodied. Well, even most of them don't even custody it themselves. They use another party
Right.
to custody it, right? So it's not even that, that they can just dip into their private wallet and give it to you if they needed to. They have to go to another party. Every time you have another party, you have a little more risk. Um, and these risks all build up on top of each other. And when you kind of keep expanding the number of parties involved, and if you start saying things like, oh, well, I'm going to take my shares of the BlackRock ETF and I'm going to use them to collateralize, another leveraged bet on something else. Well, then you've just created more leverage, more derivative, and it just gets crazy. So it's like I'm with you in that it's like we need to like get away from any influence where being able to make up stuff out of nothing with no energy, no expenditure, no effort whatsoever, which is the position the central banks have, and to some extent the commercial banks as well, then you're never going to have accountability. And this is where the whole Bitcoin fixes this mantra comes from. I know people sling it around like, oh, here's a topic, and then the road answer is, oh, Bitcoin fixes this. Well, it seems a bit kind of loosely applied, but if you really think about it, it does rein in accountability, and it does kind of fix it. Now, when people say that, they're kind of envisioning the end game
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of messiness between where we are now and where that is, and maybe in our lifetime we'll see it. And my hope is that I'll this switch or transition will happen, and I'll get to enjoy the other side of what it looks like for a while at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I guess, in like a high functioning society, we're going to have some trust, right? It makes sense. But trusting strangers is hard. You know, you might trust friends. I might trust you a little bit, might trust family.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. But people that don't know you, trusting them, you know, what even is trust? Why would I trust them? Why would they even care about me? You know, it doesn't make much sense. We're all going to look out for us and those around us, which is just human nature, and that's fine. So the least amount of trust, the better. And maybe Bitcoin can't be used worldwide. If you look at Satoshi's messages, he seems to think that there's no problem scaling Bitcoin. He talks about actually increasing the block size. Now, I know we went through the block wars and the bigger blocks failed, but who's to say that we don't revisit that, which we probably will, and we do increase the block size somehow in a different way that was done with Bcash, Bitcoin Cash. Who knows what's to happen, because it could turn into a system where, what are those stones, the Georgia Guidestones, where it says only like 500,000 people or something should live in perfect harmony with nature? We could turn into a system where it's like, well, only 500,000 people or whatever the number is can use Bitcoin on layer one self-custody. Everyone else is a slave to the stablecoin peg, second layer solutions, Lightning Network, third layer solutions. I don't want to see that, but it's possible that that's how it goes. Bitcoin's only for the privileged.
Yeah, you know, I had heard about, you mentioned the Georgia Guidestones. I heard about that years ago, and like kind of always had this like little curiosity. It's like, oh, maybe when I'm driving around on a Sunday afternoon drive, I'll swing by and just see what that's all about. Because from where I live, it's probably only like less than a 2-hour drive. And I put it off and put it off, and well, I guess I put it off too long.
Oh no, you
because it's
missed your
gone now.
chance.
I missed my chance.
Oh no.
It's like, and I've been in that part of the country, that part of the state. It's up in the northeastern part of Georgia, and they have there's a big marble quarry there. But yeah, there's a lot of weirdness about that. Too much to go into.
Yeah.
We'd have to rename our episode like a conspiracy episode. But it does say that. It says, you know, the population living in perfect harmony with nature, with a population of 500 million. Well, you say, wait a second. There's 8 billion now. So 500 million is half a billion. So that means that like 1/20th of us would survive.
Now,
Like,
don't tell me that the Bitcoin network can only support 500 million people, like 7 transactions per second. How many? If that math works out, it's definitely going to be some crazy conspiracy.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, I think we've already gotten past the whole like that the transaction speed and the amount of transactions and the number of people in the globe doesn't work out.
Right,
right. And that the reality is it doesn't have to. Yeah, that there's other mechanisms to like move value around that is anchored in Bitcoin, like Lightning, like Arc, some of these other layer twos, not even going to this other bullshit, you know, altcoin stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's like there is already now good ways to scale it. The Lightning Network has shown to be continuing to grow, and we saw like, you know, $1 million transaction on the Lightning Network as a proof of concept that was transacted recently. Now, that was probably a special situation, but it was a good proof point, and you know, it showed that there's some scale there, and the network keeps growing. So yeah, it's like, you know, there will be, like, humans will find a way, right? The human critter is a pretty resilient and industrious critter, especially when stressed, especially when, you know, when times really call for it. But, you know, it kind of lends itself also this whole idea of your own custody, your own sovereignty, you know, and that starts leading to, well, how does that, you know, apply to property rights, property, you know, whether it be real estate, whether it be your own investments, et cetera. And you look at these these sorts of legislation that's forming. It's like, how are they looking at property, right? So we saw this joint I guess statement by the CFTC and the SEC. Do you have the detail, some of the
Yeah,
detail
yeah.
on
So
that?
the SEC and CFTC Crypto Clarity Act. So on March 17th, the SEC and the CFTC issued a joint interpretation. So is that what they do? Interpret the law, right? We got lawyers. Oh, my
Yeah.
interpretation is we'll argue before a judge. The supreme ruler, the judge, will make the decision. They clarified how federal security laws apply to crypto assets specifically, not cryptocurrencies. What they said was most crypto assets are not securities, including Bitcoin and a bunch of other crappy tokens, in my opinion. 13 tokens, including Ethereum and Solana. So for me, well, they're now classified as digital commodities. So for me, this is just opening the floor for more scams, including stable coins. And it just seems like that's where we're going. It's good on one hand, it's
Yeah.
bad on the other.
So just to be clear on this, while it sounds very definitive and, legally kind of sounding, we have to understand that this is the two primary regulatory agencies making a statement of understanding and kind of, it's not legislation. So the Stable Act itself is not passed, right? The Genius Act was passed. That kind of went part of the way. The Stable Act has not passed. It's still being debated between the Senate and the Congress. And there's been, if you've been watching this stuff, there's been a big uproar between the commercial banks and the stablecoin issuers. It's like fighting about who's allowed to charge interest and or awards. I think awards is like another roundabout way of saying interest. Basically, it seems that the banks are afraid that if people see this alternate way to take their deposits, they'll pull them out of the bank and throw them in a stablecoin if they're going to get better. Hey, man, I mean, do you remember back when you get a savings account at the bank and you'd get like 5% interest or something? It's like those days are long gone, right? So it's like if you got something else that's over here, even if you don't understand what it is, and it's like, well, we'll give you 5%, whereas the bank will give you like 0.5% or 1/4%, then it's like, oh, it's a no-brainer, right? So I think the banks are seeing part of their power of, their ability to like make money eroded if this passes in a certain way. So there's been a big lobby against it, and we'll see how this kind of works out. But I think what's important to recognize too is that the Stable Act is still being debated. Mm-hmm. It hasn't passed, right? So it could change form while it's being debated. And then if they do pass it, obviously it's got to be signed by the president. I don't think it'll probably go without any objection there, whatever it ends up being, because Trump wants to like be seen as America being like the home of this stuff. We want to own this part of the sector. But what people fail to realize is that that's the law. Then there's the rule writing phase that comes. This is where the law gets codified into actual regulatory language of the rules. And the CFTC and SEC are like the agencies that basically, uphold the actual letter of the rulings. And when they talk about regulations and rules, that's what they're talking about. So the particulars are still, even after the law has been passed, the particulars are still kind of forming and getting, defined and redefined. So it's not over until really some amount of years has passed when the rule writing is like kind of solidified, and there's court cases that come and go that further like, emphasize or de-emphasize various parts of the rules. So that all takes years, right? Yeah. Like just because a judge something happens, somebody says, well, it violates this rule, then somebody sues, then there's a judge, and then there's maybe, so it's like, it's only after all of that that you really, really know what the situation is. So and this joint statement can be undone or
Right.
changed.
Right.
Like a new administration comes by, new people get in charge of the CFTC and FTC, and they decide, we didn't like that. We're gonna do something different. Policies change, administrations change. So just because it sounds good now and is a step in a direction that we like doesn't mean it's like can't be undone. Just throwing it out there. And that kind of like dovetail into another statement. Now I can't remember who exactly. I think it was the office of the comptroller. But they were saying that they would not take action against the Samurai wallet develop. I can't remember the exact details, but effectively they were saying we're not going to require software wallet developers to have a money changer license. That they were more narrowly defining what an entity is required to have a money changing license. So you think of things like Western Union, right? Like that's somebody that's transmitting money across jurisdictional lines. And a business like that has to, while they're not a bank, they have to have a money changer license because they're effectively handling other people's money. And there was always this kind of weird grayness about, well, are wallet developers kind of in the same category? They're facilitating the transfer of money from one place to another, but they don't control the custody of it. So how can they be held accountable to, having to have the same licensure that like a Western Union type of a business has to have? So I think that's also a very encouraging thing, and it takes some of the pressure off developers. But again, it could be something that's undone, changed later. Another administration comes in with another idea about what should be done, or maybe there's some sort of breach or some sort of like breach of trust against some leak, or somebody like loses in a big way and there's a big uproar. Who knows? So
Yeah.
that can, again, until we get past, the law's got to get passed, got to get signed, and then the rule writing's got to be established, and then the rule writing has to be tested with judicial cases. Then it is what it is. Then if you want to change something again, you got to go back to the beginning. You got to like get a new law made that undoes the law. And then it's got to get passed. It's got to get rule writing. Things got to be adjusted. At the end of the day, like even things like getting rid of the income tax would be another amendment to the Constitution, right?
Mm.
And the process to get that done is significant.
Yeah.
You got to have a certain number of states that have to like approve it. It's got to get enacted. Yeah, that's like the hardest thing to change, right?
Yeah, I think adding Bitcoin to this legal legislation, whatever it is, these documents, these rules, SEC says it's good, they categorize it. CFTC says it's good, it's a digital commodity. I think it's good for adoption, but what happened? Did Satoshi go to these people and say that? That's the ultimate, right? Where you do it permissionlessly, just make it anonymously. That's the ultimate, so maybe that's not needed for everything, but of course for Bitcoin that was definitely needed. But this is good though because it'll allow developers to work to create Bitcoin wallets and to do things without fear of going to jail. So now what's happening with the Samurai guys? Isn't there two guys? Aren't they both locked up? Do you know what's happening
They're
now
in
with them?
jail. Yeah, this kind of listening to the Bitcoin sort of podcast set of things here and there. It's really an awkward position
Yeah.
because these guys were incarcerated under the Biden regime, which was really being heavy-handed in how they were viewing crypto businesses. And to their, I mean, they could have definitely done things better, in how they talked about what they were doing. But talking about something is different than like actually violating law. I think they will say, well, they kind of promoted it as a quasi money laundering mechanism, and technically it did obfuscate, origin of funds. So it did what they set out to do with it.
Mhm.
And whether it was for, increasing privacy amongst, law-abiding citizens or not, that becomes, the use of the tool versus the tool itself. So like, do you sue the baseball bat manufacturer when somebody like takes a baseball bat and like clubs somebody else on the head?
Definitely
No.
not.
so so while they were incarcerated and I think kind of pressured to take a plea agreement that would have limited their amount of jail time under the Biden regime and under Gary Gensler's sort of SEC uh, regime, they kind of got the short end. They kind of, in my mind, they did. And with these new stances being kind of openly put forward by the administration and the agencies, I think, in my mind, they have a really good case to having clemency in their case.
Hmm.
But technically, that's not the case. We could look at things like Ross Ulbricht with his release from prison. He did that black market.
Silk
What was it
Road.
called? Silk Road, right? So it's like, where do we go with all of that? And we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I personally think that they should revisit their case, and given the current kind of understanding and demeanor and where all this stuff is going, they should be reconsidered. But again, that's as a software developer, I don't want to have like potential stuff like that hanging over my head.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense because, right, people are going to be afraid to create software, but also maybe people see that the Samurai devs being locked up, and now they're going to be extra cautious creating software, being anonymous. Maybe some tools will come out, some strategies, and it will create a new avenue for developers to make things anonymous. Maybe that will become like some sort of new standard.
Potentially. I think if you want to take a purist approach, you have to say, look, if software is free speech and free speech is protected, then I can write whatever software I want because it's free speech. And while we kind of run under the premise that the United States has free speech, we find that that people get conditioned to self-censor, right? Yeah. I mean, how many people, like, when you see something on YouTube or something, they'll say things like, "Oh, that person was unalived."
Yeah.
It's like, what, are you afraid to say dead or killed or murdered?
What the hell's that mean?
Like, that's the like, well, and then they'll say, well, I'm trying to like not be banned by the algorithms.
Yeah.
Well, but that's censorship. Yeah. It's like, so and we saw, like, through the whole COVID epidemic, right? Like, people were using different words for things just because of fear of being banned, or the societal sort of, temperament was shifting.
Yeah.
And we wanted to be like extra sensitive in ways. But at the end of the day, that comes across, that's self-censoring. That's censorship that has won and been rooted in people's behaviors. And to me, that in itself is a danger. So
yeah, it's pressure. You're getting pressured by an outcome, and then you'll change your ways. But not only that, so you say maybe we have free speech, but we're always altering, changing, and shaving it all, because now you have free speech, but now there's something called hate speech. I hate your speech, right? Well, I hate your speech. So we could define these things, hate speech. Well, that's hate speech. Well, nah, I don't really think that doesn't offend me. That's not hate speech, but it might offend the next guy. Oh, that's hate speech, you know? So it's just crazy, slippery slope, gray area where it's either free speech or not free speech.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife not too long ago. I'm like, I'm noticing that like in public broadcasting sort of modes, like mainstream media, like people are dropping the F bomb here and there. And that would have never flown like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? It's like, and now president dropped the F bomb. So it's like, in a press conference or something like that. So it's like, you know, uh, okay, so societal norms and taboos shift
They
over
do.
time.
They do.
And I think you judge things based on the context of norms in society and in culture. And that does shift. So to judge like, whether, if the president says something and it's offensive, would have been deemed as offensive in the late 1800s, doesn't necessarily mean it should be like, viewed that way today.
Mhm.
However, it's like when you have a system of control of the channels of media and you sense that if you express things in a certain way, you're going to get like that channel's going to get cut off, then that in my mind, that's a First Amendment, oppression, and that you don't really have true freedom of speech.
Yeah.
What the fact that that society at large tolerates it is like a separate question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
All right. So our last
So
topic for the show is in a recent interview with Morgan Stanley, we have Stanley Druckenmiller talking about Bitcoin's utility and the use of stablecoins. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but Stanley Druckenmiller said, I'm actually disappointed Bitcoin ended up becoming a store of value because it wasn't originally needed for that, but it's become a brand and people love it. So it's probably going to be a store of value. So he thinks Bitcoin is going to be a store of value, and he talks about stable coins, how they will likely be global payments, used for global payments within 10 to 15 years.
so I agree with his premise as he's seeing it now, as it's viewed now. I disagree that it's going to be that way. I don't think Bitcoin is stuck being viewed as a store of value for only forever.
Hopefully not.
I think payments. I think the whole stablecoin and the whole like perpetuating the U.S. dollar across the globe, like and through the use of these things effectively, it's going to, in my mind, give the dollar a kind of last gasp of air by allowing, not so much in the U.S. but in other jurisdictions where their national coin, their national currency is so much weaker than the dollar.
Mhm.
In their perspective, like if I have to hold my savings in my local currency and it's being like eroded away and inflated away at this rate, or I could put it in the U.S. dollar and it's less bad, right? it's like comparatively inflating away. I know stable is kind of a misnomer in my mind, but it's like we're kind of stuck with it. But it's like then the decision is pretty clear. It's like, well, I move my savings into the thing that's like less bad.
Yep.
But I think Bitcoin is the best of all situations, but we're not there yet in terms of
Right.
awareness and realization. So if you're sitting in, I don't know, Pakistan or something, and you can't, and and your government's making stupid decisions and just like driving inflation out the roof, it's like, what do? It's like you buy stuff and hoard it, commodities, grain, stuff that you need. You buy precious metals maybe, or oil, or something that, you have a good feeling you can like resell later when you need it. So, or there's, if this other thing, US dollar denominated stable coins is available, nobody can stop you from buying or selling it, then it's a pretty good option. Now in the United States, we don't really think of it that way, but there's a lot of people that are not in the United States and that are under, some degree of this kind of dilemma. And we just effectively gave them like an extra option that is going to create more and more treasury demand, because every stable coin has to be backed, supposedly. Again, trust me, bro, has to be backed by a treasury or some equivalent. And like, who audits that? When does that happen? I think is something people don't think about too much. But anyway, I think it's going to serve that function for a while, but I think that will erode as the dollar, value changes, and we'll just have to see. Yeah. Again, if it takes 40 years, then, well, in my lifetime, it didn't happen. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, so I at some point, I think you got to look at these things and like, okay, it might be an inevitable, but if it takes, 40 years to play out, then I got to do things given the circumstances I find myself in now and where my near-term anticipation is. So,
well, that's one of the reasons why we're here. We're here to talk about Bitcoin, Spaces protocol. And just think about it. Bitcoin backed by energy, global money, global, worldwide. We're going on the internet more. It's digital. And it's funny to think that each country has their own paper or digital currency that their own people, governments can create for free whenever they decide. That's funny that every country has the authority to create these digital vaporware currencies. Yeah, they'll print them sometimes and they'll make paper equivalents. Then we value them amongst each other. Bitcoin just seems super obvious. It's backed by money. Nobody controls it. You can use it over the internet. Every country can use it. It's equal for every country. So the politicians in this country can't create their currency and buy 2 for 1, BOGO sales from everything that this other country offers. I'm just going to make my dollar for free, and it's worth 10 times your dollar. So let me just make a couple of these dollars, and I'm going to go on a spending spree and buy out your whole country. Real estate, oil, whatever it is, That's what happens, unfortunately. And people just need to understand that Bitcoin is an amazing solution to fix that problem.
Yeah, it is. And like I say, in the interim, I think it's going to have more and more a dampening sort of effect on the system that we understand today. And
hopefully,
but we'll see. Things do tend to like accelerate if there's some catalyst. Maybe this Iran thing's a catalyst. Maybe the private equity market's a catalyst. Maybe it takes a few things kind of hitting simultaneously to get that true black swan event, that really causes a cascade. But we'll see. We'll see where it happens. But it's always fun to talk about. I know we didn't really talk about spaces too much, but I think just to kind of remind people, like names as property is like meaningless unless it's been anchored somewhere where no one else can mess with it, right?
Right.
And I think this is like a big value prop of the Spaces protocol, and we'll be talking a lot more about it in detail. It kind of went in the macro world today, but I think that's fine.
Hopefully soon.
That's right.
All
right, sir.
It was a good show. Good seeing you today.
Yep, you too. And I will talk to you guys soon.
We covered it. Yep. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one.
Take care.